Yes, welcome. This is F for Rap Critic. I'm your boy Malik 16, and no, I'm not a Scorpio. It is officially the end of Libra season today, and I am officially the closer of Libra season. Every year, that's when you start to see this shirt pop out. We take a little break from rocking our I Used to Love Her tees, which you can cop on the raproota.com. And while you're at it, if you really want to make the boy's birthday special, like and subscribe to the channel. Appreciate all the new follows, but let's make this channel blow up charade so we can really get a true sense of this global hip-hop community. But enough about me. I don't want to be too selfish, even though this is the time of year, because it's Libra season and it's my birthday, that I start shining light and highlighting albums that are specifically special to me. So not just classics, but classics that I have a personal bias towards. It's the only time of year where I reserve the right for a little bit of bias, because I'm super objective 95% of the times. But today, I'm not the only Libra. We're talking about an album that's turning 20. So it's the other birthday going on today, and we're talking about none other than Field Mob's sophomore album, From the Roota to the Toota. Now, this may be a classic that is not widely known by the masses, but a classic nonetheless. A little background on this album. As noted, it was released on October 22nd of 2002. And this is the second album by the group named Field Mob, but it's also the first album under the new individual monikers of Sean J and Smoke. So let's get into it. We're gonna be talking about Category 1, which is the album, the product itself. And the first dimension we talk about when we're dealing with Category 1 is Dimension 1, the quality of the production. Now, one thing that stands out about this album is that it is a fair mix of who was who in 2002, but it's also a fair mix of well-known producers and lesser-known producers, and they're all contributing kind of evenly across the album. And so you get contributions here from a multitude of co-producers. So you have people like Marcus Darling or Marquise Darling, you got D Lakes, you got Fence, you got Track, you got Gorilla Tech and Mozart, who are most notably associated with Slip and Slide Records. And then you also have Ole-E, pay attention to that name because you're gonna hear that name come up again, Guy West, Ebo, Jazzy Faye, Greg Street, and bonus points if you knew this already, Earth Tone 3, otherwise known as ET3, otherwise known as Mr. DJ, Big Boy Daddy Fat Sax, and Andre 3000. Another notable thing about the production on this album is that there's a deliberate effort you can see made here to avoid sampling. It's not any recognizable or familiar sampling going on, if at all. Most of the album pushes towards original production. Even the soulful tracks on here are coming from a space of musicianship, hence the presence of people like Ebo, who lends live bass guitar playing on at least 3 of the tracks on the album. And so you're getting different tempos. It starts off very up-tempo with KAN and ends on a very mellow note and soulful note with All I Know. And that's the journey that this album is going to take you through sonically. You're going to get some of those bass guitar grooves, those piano grooves, and things that kind of emphasize the country angle. And then you're still getting some of the raw hip-hop sounding stuff like No Problems and Betty Rocker. And then the sounds prevalent of the day. So you get beats like Haters, which sounded like a typical Slip and Slide camp track at the time, something that Trick Daddy would rap over, or any of the affiliated rappers from that camp. And then you get what was kind of the standard Jazzy Faye production with the wah-wah guitars and the curly notes of the day. Everything that Jazzy Faye was running around in the early 2000s doing, this was in that same vein. So you do get those kind of production notes. Dark production is not really something that is incorporated here. The darkest track on here would be No Problems, and it was meant to just kind of be more stripped down and toned down, so the rappers are blending in with the mood of the beat and then also the message of that particular song. So not an album that leaves room or incorporates a lot of darkness, but very rich with the musical sounds. You're hearing horns, I mentioned pianos, a lot of curly notes. There's even the use of like a West Coast inspired funky worm on the track that has more of a Dr. Dre influence, which is Hit It For Free. So some tracks are livelier than others, some tracks are noisier than others, and some are smoother. Something to note is that the Earth Tone 3 production here sounds very much like organized noise production, which, of course, if you're familiar with Dungeon Family history and music history, you know that Outkast comes from the camp. And so the tracks here that feature Dungeon Family members are produced by Earth Tone 3 and distinctly have more of an organized noise sound. Whereas if you look at other projects, specifically Outkast projects with Earth Tone 3 production, it seemed like there was a conscious move to not sound like organized noise to differentiate themselves. But here, it's like, okay, let me give you what you're familiar with. I don't know if that was requested or if that was just the mode and phase that the crew was in at the time. But this is all something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. A lot of what I've been touching on takes us to dimension 2. We talk about the cohesiveness. So if we have up-tempo songs, we have more mellow songs, we have straight up Southern soul kind of tracks that hit right in the middle, and then we have these electronic frenetic beats. How does it all go together? So of course, sequencing is gonna be the gem here. There are no moments on the album where they clutter one pacing for too long. If you go from the first 3 songs, it gives you an idea of what you're getting into on this album. It gives you a piece of all the flavors right off the bat. So if we start with something like KAN, you don't hear another track as energetic and choppy as that until you get to the Gorilla Tech track Haters, which is down the line in the middle of the album. And so in between there, you get Nothing to Lose, which is your first Earth Tone 3 production contribution, and it's bringing in the mid-tempo soulfulness with these hip-hop drums that keep it going. So the pacing didn't take a drop, it just smoothed out a little bit, and then you get No Problems, which is slower than both of those 2 tracks, but because it's darker, it creates this like distinctly southern mood that is over an open beat. And then of course after that you get the Jazzy Fade production, which lightens everything up but still keeps it mid-tempo. It doesn't slow down until the track It's Hell. And on this album you're only going to get 2.5 slower tracks, and that's All I Know and It's Hell, which are the 2 most profound and poignant songs on the album, and they're distinctly made to be slower so you can hear what's being said, so there's more thought-provoking and more emotion coming out of those tracks, and they're placed perfectly where one is in the middle, one is at the end. And if you consider Cut Loose as a slow track, it might be slower sounding because it's stripped down again, but yeah, that's on you. That's where I leave the half point there. And so that's the way the album is formatted. You get those combinations in a spaced out enough array from each other that just when a slower mood is needed, that's what you got. Even if it's a notch down from up-tempo to mid-tempo, that's where we're rolling. Same thing can be said for the sounds used. If we're going from a piano beat, the next beat is going to be more guitar bass. If we're going from an electro beat, the next beat is going to be more soulful with organic instruments. For instance, you get Hit It For Free, which is the Dr. Dre influence or inspired sounding beat that I mentioned, with heavy drums, big blaring horns that sound triumphant and victorious, with this smooth grooving bass line and that funky worm modulating all through the beat. And then it's followed by Betty Rocker, which is almost this like Neptunesy drum sounding track that's electro with, squeaky sounds bouncing all around over these clackety drums, which takes us right into Cut Loose, which is just simple guitar playing and some bells ringing in the background. And that's a microcosm of the sequence in there. It's all evened out by each other. So magically, all these different producers seem to work very well together, and that's all something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 3, where we talk about the intentional mood or tone of this album. And so Field Mob not really having that wide reach at this point, had a lot of free space to play with here, and a lot of open ground and territory to conquer. And if there's any statements being made besides the individual ones as an album, I would say they're subtle in a loud way. It's not that there's any overarching thing that Field Mob wants you to take home, except for being entertained and respecting their skill level. But in the beginning, the very first song, KAN, starts off with Sean J and Smoke repeating and yelling out, "I'm from the South, I represent the South, South, South." And this is not an album where they're really driving that home like a lot of the other Southern albums at the time, where they're like, "You gonna respect us, we've been down for too long." There was none of that edge to it of we're planting the flag. It was just, yo, we proudly represent the South. We're playing off of this country image in a way like how we saw Crucial Conflict play off the Midwest image with the overalls and the farm and barnyard hay thing. Field Mob always kind of leaves the imagery there, but they don't lead with it. They lead with their skill set. They're more interested in letting you know the range of what they can do as far as the flows, what they can talk about, the beats, the people they work with, topics, and style. So it's not an overly gangster album. It's not an overly Southern album. It's not an overly lyrical album. And it's not an overly stylish album. It's just all of these different things with humor. And so that is an undercurrent. It may not be a theme, it may not even be a mood, but it's a tone that is ever present. They were not afraid to use humor, and this is one of the things that always stood out to me at the time, because I was in a duo. Shout out to King Keto, my man Brandon Carter. We were a duo, and we had early recognized that so many rappers were taking this hard approach, and this is before Kanye West came out, so there wasn't no such thing as this middle lane. You're either a gangster rapper or a backpacker. We always thought both were very extreme, and we're like, where's the humor? So you had groups like Slum Village and Field Mob emerging at this time that were letting you know, hey, it's okay to kind of just be and make people laugh without being taken as clowns, which was new to consider. Or you can be into material stuff but still not want to be a killer and still like have a message. And so these were the burgeoning things that were coming in hip hop before we had names and labels to slap on them. Field Mob's right there in the middle. They rap about guns, but they're not selling a thug image. They rap about women, but they're not Luke. And they rap with content, but they're not Public Enemy. So humor and light nods to the South without being overwhelming would be themes and moods to take from this album and tone. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 4, the song distinction versus repetition of the words and the sounds. I mentioned each producer kind of having an even share here. Ole-E is who you get the most production from here, and Ole-E is really the secret weapon of this album. Even though Earth Tone 3's presence was not broadcasted wisely, people didn't know that Outkast was involved in this album, it's really Ole-E who is the lesser known producer out of almost everyone here, who brings the most variety and range. He's producing tracks like It's Hell, which is very reminiscent of something like Life Goes On by Tupac, and it sounds like it's sampled from an older song, but it's really just this guitar and bass beat that allows emotion to be evoked. And then you get the darker beat which has got 808s and this running bass with just a few subtle notes, but it's the darkest beat on the album. And then you get something so soulful like Cut Loose, which could almost be a country song. And then you also get Hit It For Free, which is the Dr. Dre sounded beat, which shows you that all this coming from one guy and his co-producers here and there, it is like, oh, you can do a little bit of this, that, and everything. And so a very southern rap group giving you a not very southern sounding album, because they're hitting all different kinds of sounds and styles, courtesy of Ole-E, and he's playing with the full scope of what's in front of him. Now you get Jazzy Faye's signature sound. I mentioned the wah-wah guitars, some of those wet sounds, and a more commercial polish to his production compared to the choppy, bouncy production from Mozart and Gorilla Tech, and then Earth Tone 3, which are giving you more of that soulful feeling, but in a different way than what Ole-E is getting. And not a lot of room for repetition of sounds here. Now, word-wise, because I mentioned Field Mob doesn't have any particular thing to brand except for their hood. They mention the South. They mention their names a lot, which was important because, again, they're trying to rebrand themselves and reintroduce themselves, not as Boondocks Black and Collage anymore, but as Sean J and Smoke, also known as Chevy Pendergrass. So you start seeing all of this. If you hear anything repeated, it's them making sure they say their names within songs, so you know by the end of the album this is Smoke and Sean J. And they also do it in a way where they very clearly distinguish themselves from each other. A lot of duos, you can either get lost because they don't have distinctive sounds and voices, and this is a group that their voices are very different, but the way that they emphasize things is similar. So if you're not familiar visually, you could get lost in that. Them saying their names is like the beacon to let you know who's on the mic. And so, yeah, other than that, not a lot of repetition when it comes to words. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 5. The amount of content versus the amount of songs. All about ratios here. Now, this is a 15-track album. 3 of those tracks are skits, and 1 of those is a remix. So if you don't consider those 4 to be countable, then it's really 11 tracks. 11 takes us right into that magic golden safe space of classic album material where it's really hard to mess it up. I talked about the 2 heaviest songs on here. It's Hell and All I Know, which come perfectly in the middle and at the end of the album, but that is not where the content stops. You also get songs where they touch on different things in pockets, or a song like No Problem, which is not heavy-handed but very situational and with a message, or a song like Nothing to Lose, which is situational, metaphorical, and message driven. So out of 11 tracks, already having 4, 2 of them being heavy, 2 not so heavy, not counting the songs about women, you get in a fair balance of topics, and you count songs that, even if it sounds braggadocio, it has a theme to it. Betty Rocker is about cooking crack. Haters are about haters, and so on and so forth, and the different shades that I mentioned about the way they talk about women on each song. No song on here about women is about the same issue. So something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, if you consider that a fair balance. Takes us to dimension 6, the features. We have most notably Trick Daddy on the song Haters. We have Cee-Lo Green on All I Know. We have Joy from the Dungeon family on Where You Going. We have Sleepy Brown and Slim Calhoun, also from the Dungeon family, on Nothing to Lose. Cocaine. And then we have Ole-E on his Hell, who is also the in-house producer, which is why I told you to pay attention to that name, because the man is multi-talented, multifaceted, behind the boards and on the mic. He actually leads off the song It's Hell, which oftentimes when you hear stuff like that, there's reason to believe that that might have been that person's song originally, and they gave it to the group and shared it. On Sick of Being Lonely, there's also a singer featured by the name of Torica, who was under Jazzy Faye at the time. So the question of, do these features help or hurt? Each feature brings their own unique essence to each track, and it can be argued that they were much needed, because even though you're getting the bouncing off and the chemistry between Sean J and Smoke. Every now and then, because they're so similar with how they were emphasizing words and approaching ad-libs, getting a different tone, like what Trick Daddy gives you in the middle of Haters, where he just slows it down a bit and makes it clear cut and a gruffer voice, as opposed to the more melodic and expressive styles of Sean J and Smoke. It balances and it gives you something that, yeah, on an 11-track album would have been fine either way, but it just makes it that much better to have these breaks in it. Now, it can be argued that Slim Calhoun maybe didn't stick with the theme as much on Nothing to Lose, and the song is pretty long already, and because he comes last, it kind of feels like, okay, this song was good either way. So you also have Cocaine on here from the West Coast, who's considered a West Coast legend in some circles. He does this George Clinton style rap singing thing. On the song that he's featured on, Hit It For Free, it sounds more a little all over the place and more like he freestyled his verse. He's just kind of going anywhere. Some lines don't rhyme. He's just kind of talking and doing the thing. So it's up to you if you consider that a weakness. Cee-Lo kind of matches Sean J and Smoke style instead of doing his normal smooth approach. You never know what you're gonna get with Cee-Lo. Sometimes he approaches the mic very cautiously and measures out every word. Sometimes he raps, and sometimes he does his like sped up kind of flow. And on here, he did more of a sped up version for his verse. None of the singers seem to be unbalanced with the tracks or off key from what's given here. They seem to have understood the assignment, whether you know them or not, whether you're not familiar with Joy or Torica. And then each Sean J and Smoke contribute to the hooks. And so that adds for like a nice grouping when you have features also doing the hooks together. This is all something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to dimension 7. The question of, does the weakest song or do the weakest songs bring the album down? What are the weakest songs on here? Well, it depends on if you like some of the more dated or energetic tracks like KAN and Betty Rocker and even Haters. Some may find it hard to get past the production on there since it's so choppy and bouncy, and because of the sounds being used and who it's affiliated with, those albums may sound rooted in the early 2000s and harder to listen to. And it doesn't help that the way that Sean J and Smoke are rapping, bouncing over already bouncy tracks, might make them kind of skippable. Now, if you don't like slower tracks, then tracks like All I Know and It's Hell might seem a little too dramatic for you, and those might be skippable on that end of the spectrum for you. But these things are always subjective, something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 8, mass appeal. All right, for a group on a non-hip-hop forward label like MCA, which was about to go in flux and just stop back in all of their urban department, they were able to get out at least 2 videos for this album and remixes. They got major producers here, so they had generated some respect within the industry and connections where they have Outkast producing, they have Dungeon Family present all over this album, and then they have people like Trick Daddy and Jazzy Faye backing them. Now, there's also a version of the All I Know song that includes a verse by T.I. And for the big Day One T.I. fans, a lot of people consider this one of his best verses. Why it's not included on the album, I don't know, but you can find it on YouTube. Rumor has it that Ashanti was originally the singer on the song Sick of Being Lonely. If anybody knows the fuller backstory on that, that'd be great to hear. But it sounded like they were priming themselves to have more mainstream success than they did with their first album, and they did. They wound up having Sick of Being Lonely, the lead single, hit the charts on a decent number on the charts, and it helped this album go gold. Not bad for a group that probably wasn't getting a lot of play in the northern markets or the West Coast markets. And so for that moment in time, Phil Mob was a group that people were checking. And so the popularity of that single definitely made it a song that I know that a lot of women have in their playlists to this day, even if they're not familiar with who it is. I know Smoke, shout out to Smoke and Sean J. I tried to reach out to both of them to get them to be a part of this interview, but holla at me it's never too late. We can do part 2, and I'd love to get y'all ratings on your own work. But me and my girl, we actually watched a reality series that Smoke was a part of under his real name, Darian. And my girl's someone who knows Sick of Being Lonely by heart. She can rap both verses, but did not know who Darian was when seeing him on TV. Did not know Smoke from a can of paint. And I think this is one of those songs very similar to another duo, Camp Low, where everybody and their mama knows the song Lucchini, but wouldn't be able to pick out Geechee Suede and Sonny Chiba from a lineup if you made them. So it's really interesting. I'd like to believe that Phil Mob has just a little bit more recognizable quality to them because they've had other hits and they've made a big impact on hip hop in different ways. But from this album alone, that song lives on more than the other singles from here. Now, you can tell the songs that may have been intended singles, like Haters and Where Are You Going, but then you have songs that have gone on to be cult classics like Cut Loose and Hit It For Free, which the way that they speak about interactions with women, again, incorporates that humor, but just the cleverness of wordplay and just the skills used on those songs are what made him stand out to people who really zone in and tune into hip hop. Some of the hooks, particularly the hooks on Cut Loose, Where Are You Going, and It's Hell, seem to run a little longer than they need to. When you hear things like that, it tells me that the group either ran out of creative juices and ideas, because naturally you would think, well, let's put a bridge there, let's put a little refrain there, or they just were not thinking singles-minded radio format. Maybe instead of letting this song go to 4 or 5 minutes, we should cut this so it can be 3 minutes and 20 seconds and rock on the radio. And so, getting respect, getting big features, getting radio play, all that stuff matters when we're talking about mass appeal. This is clearly an album where both members went in saying, okay, we have some songs where we're going to tone it down and make it more digestible, and we have some songs where we know we just want to do what we want to do, even if you have the industry interfering. I know Smoke has been quoted as saying he felt like he had the most freedom of his career under any label when he was with DTP, but maybe not such a bad thing if the label made them make Sick of Being Lonely. So, something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That takes us to dimension 9. Everyone's favorite, 3 eyes: impact, innovation, influence. Now, I talked about the impact. A song like Sick of Being Lonely lives on throughout the universe, lives on through playlists and nostalgia. And then you get among the fans of this album and the group, like myself, a real appreciation. I think Phil Mob had built a reputation from this album of being unsung, underrated, whereas before they may have been seen as the poor man's outcast, which makes it really interesting and really significant, knowing that Outkast backed them behind the scenes on this album, and they had so much support from the Dungeon family that it's almost a mystery why they weren't invited to just join the Dungeon family, same way we saw Bubba Sparxxx kind of get absorbed in the next few years. But that means something, because they were carving out their own identity, and I think the humor and the rap skills and rap approach is really what separated them from any other duos at the time and any other Southern rappers at the time, and got them a lot of respect. Now, they probably would have got more respect from the North had they gotten the chance to showcase songs like Hit It For Free, No Problems, and other songs where they're really just spitting and really using a lot of technical devices in their rap structures. And for the heads who know, or the people who really tuned in, you realize that these guys are lyricists to a T, and that they are very flow driven. and that a lot of rappers could probably take notes from the chemistry that they had. And so this is an album that I think a lot of people have gone back to, which is a part of why it went gold. Innovation, Chevy P, Smoke was always a rapper who wasn't shy about harmonizing for whole verses. And this is before rap singing really had a name. This is when Ja Rule was doing it and people were complaining about it right when 50 was coming in. But what Smoke was doing was really harmonizing. Every now and then Sean J would do it too, but I can't say that they sparked anything from that, but I can say they were part of that rising wave of this being more acceptable in rap. And that might be the extent of the impact, influence, and innovation here, but it's all something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Takes us to the final dimension, dimension 10, the overall uniqueness and timelessness of this album. I mentioned that some of the tracks might sound dated in a way where you can tell what era it is. I don't know if it's reached the point where any of the beats or songs are dated where you cringe because it sounds so old and trapped in an era. Because they weren't riding any waves, they are free of being boxed in. But yeah, besides that, because of the Southern Soul aspect, there's a timeless quality to most of the production on there, and a lot of respect has to be given for making a conscious effort to have original production. As far as the rhymes, there's lines on there that rappers from a rapper's ear like me are still going to have to rewind to discover. Something to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That concludes our category 1 review of the album turning 20 today on my birthday, October 22nd. From the Roota to the Toota by Field Mob. Join us for category 2 where we go over the rap performance by Smoke and Sean J. And until then, y'all know what it is. F for Rap Critic. They talk about it while I live it. Word to meth.